is kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And how like what you focus on, even if you're focusing on it in a way where it's like, I don't want to be like this, you're still thinking about it so much that you end up making it happen. Hello, thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, published in 2012, and I'm comparing it with the movie directed by David Fincher, which was released in 2014. And this was my second time reading the book and watching the movie, and I am happy to report that they both hold up the second time around. I will say, the first time I read this book, I knew the big reveal that happens in the middle of the book. I didn't know anything else though, so the book, even though I knew that detail, the book was still a wild ride and so many shocking things happen. But it is one of my biggest life regrets that I never went into this story, whether the book or the movie, I never went into one not knowing the reveal. Like, what an insane experience that must have been, right? Fight Club level shock at what happens in this movie or a book. And so, yeah, it's just one of my biggest regrets that due to things I saw online before I went into this story, I already knew a major plot detail. And yeah, I would love to hear down below in the comments for the people who went into this not knowing. I would love to hear what that experience was like. And when you got to that middle part, like, did your jaw just drop? Or did you see it coming? I don't know. But yeah, share your experience with this story, whether it was the book or the movie, whichever you did first. Share your experience down below in the comments. But from here on out, I'm going to get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So the book and movie begin with Nick's wife, Amy, going missing on their 5th wedding anniversary. And every year she would make a treasure hunt for him with clues that related to their life over the past year. And before she went missing, she had already laid out the clues. So in this first half, we learn about their marriage through Nick and his thoughts, through this treasure hunt, and through Amy's diary entries that the reader is shown. And before Nick realizes Amy has gone missing, we see through his conversations with his sister Go and through his thoughts, we see that he isn't feeling great about his marriage with Amy at this point. And he also hates these treasure hunts because, again, all of the clues relate to things that happened in the last year, but he always gets them wrong and he can never figure them out, and it just leaves Amy feeling disappointed. And this is a change from book to movie in regards to their early years, because from the very first treasure hunt in the book, it did not go well. And he had a hard time getting the answers. And he also didn't like the gift Amy gave him, even that first anniversary. Whereas in the movie, it makes it seem like the early treasure hunts were actually a fun romantic experience. But yeah, in the book, it just went poorly right off the bat. But yeah, so back to Nick in current day. He is unhappy in his marriage and he feels like Amy just always expects so much of him, and he feels like he is just constantly letting her down. And I wanted to share a quote, which, by the way, I'm going to be sharing a lot of quotes throughout this video, so I mean, I don't feel like I need to apologize for that. I'm just giving you a heads up that this book has so many great segments, and I could not help but share a ton of quotes. So this first quote about their relationship and how Nick views Amy, I wanted to read. Amy made me believe I was exceptional, that I was up to her level of play. That was both our making and undoing. Because I couldn't handle the demands of greatness. I began craving ease and averageness, and I hated myself for it, and ultimately I realized I punished her for it. I turned her into the brittle, prickly thing she became. I had pretended to be one kind of man and revealed myself to be quite another. Worse, I convinced myself our tragedy was entirely her making. I spent years working myself into the very thing I swore she was, a righteous ball of hate. And then another quote about Nick's personality reads, I often don't say things out loud, even when I should. I contain and compartmentalize to a disturbing degree. In my belly basement are hundreds of bottles of rage, despair, fear, but you'd never guess from looking at me. And 2 things that put a strain on their marriage within the first 2 or 3 years was that both of them, they're living in New York City, and both of them get laid off from their jobs. However, Amy comes from a wealthy family, and she has nearly $1 million in a trust fund, and so financially, they're still doing fine. It's just, the hit their egos take by losing their jobs, especially Nick, because he just sulks and mopes around a lot after he is laid off. Also, another quick side detail that's different from book to movie. So in both, the morning Amy disappears, the cops are of course like, Nick, where were you? What's your alibi? And in the movie, he says how like, oh, Amy suggested I go to the beach or go to the ocean and think about our marriage. And so he's like, that's what I did. I went to the ocean and I thought about our marriage. But he has no witnesses because the beach was empty. Whereas in the book, he tells them the same thing, when in reality, he never went to the beach at all. First, so he went and saw Andie, and the two of them hooked up, but he can't tell the cops about that. I will get to Andie in a second. But then there's still like a few hours unaccounted for, and he admits to his sister and his lawyer, he's like, sometimes there's an old warehouse that I stash my old magazines that he was a writer for. And so sometimes he just goes to this warehouse and reads these old issues of back when he was a writer for this magazine. And so showing how he is still holding on to that. And again, just like what a hit it was to his ego to lose this job that he had been so proud of. But yeah, so back to them living in New York. So they both lose their jobs. And then Amy's parents come to her and they tell her that they are in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And so they need to borrow the majority of the money that is left in her trust fund. And Amy obliges. And then Nick's mom gets cancer and he doesn't want his sister go, having to be the one to deal with it all. And so he tells her, without first consulting Amy, that they can move to Missouri to help out as well. And Amy, in the book in particular, she hates having to leave New York, and she hates Missouri. And in the movie, we see at the start that the town has a lot of shut down businesses, but in the book, we hear even more about how he brought his dying marriage to this dying town. And also in the movie, their neighborhood, it looks pretty nice. Whereas in the book, they were living in a McMansion, so they did have a nice place to live. However, the neighborhood was basically a ghost town, and there were so many yards that were just overgrown, and he and this other guy would have to mow all of these yards because the neighborhood was also infested with raccoons. And so he talks about how even though they have to mow, he's like, it doesn't get rid of the raccoons, but at least this way we can see them coming. And so yeah, the movie left out, just what a ghost town and how empty and depressing this town really was. But yeah, soon after they move here, Nick, he then asks to borrow the rest of Amy's trust fund money so that he and his sister can buy a bar, which they co-run together. And then, Go doesn't even like Amy. And so Amy just feels very left out, and it becomes, Nick and Go are just two peas in a pod, and Amy just feels left out of everything. So yeah, their relationship is not in a good place. But then around the time they'd been married for 4 years, Nick really just pushes things over the edge when he begins an affair with a girl named Andie. She is in her early 20s. He is in his early 30s. Every now and then, like once a week or something, he teaches at a community college. So she had been one of his students. And again, Nick felt unhappy with Amy because he felt like she put all this pressure on him to be better than he was, and he felt like he could never do anything right, and he was always disappointing her. And so we read in the book how the affair with Andie began, and it was when one night she comes into his bar, and we then read. So she asks for a drink, and then we read, "What flavor you like?" I asked. "Whatever you give me, I'll like." It was that line that caught me, the simplicity of it, the idea that I could do something and it would make a woman happy and it would be easy. Whatever you give me, I'll like. I felt an overwhelming wave of relief. And then I knew I didn't love Amy anymore. She laughed with me, made me laugh. She didn't immediately contradict me or second guess me. She never scowled at me. She was easy. It was all so effing easy. And we know from that earlier quote that Nick is bad at communicating his dissatisfaction and his anger and everything. And so he continues the affair with Andie, feeling like he is in love with her and wanting to end things with Amy, but he never has the guts to actually say something to her. And we read that he just doesn't put any effort into their marriage at this point, and he hopes Amy will just ask for a divorce on her own and he can avoid the blame. But he enjoys being with Andie because she is, of course, young and beautiful, and she enjoys sex, and because he is so much older and experienced, and he can show her new things and teach her new things, and she seems to like this. Whereas, of course, Amy, she's even older than Nick. And so she is very smart and experienced, and she doesn't need Nick to teach her new things, right? And so it is very much the whole born sexy yesterday, that attraction there. And I'm not saying Andie is stupid. I'm just saying that she is young and naive. And so Nick being able to introduce her to all of these new things she's never heard of before, it just gives him that confidence boost he is wanting by having someone be like, wow, you're so impressive. But after Amy's disappearance, Andie comes over while Nick is sleeping at Go's house, and Go ends up seeing her when Andie tries to sneak out in the morning. And Go sees right away that Nick just likes Andie because she is young and naive, and because she and Nick don't actually have an actual relationship, because when you're sneaking around, it doesn't count as a legit relationship. And so she tells him, "You do realize that if you actually dated her, saw her on a regular basis, lived with her, that she would find some fault with you, right? That she would find some things about you that drove her crazy, that she'd make demands of you that you wouldn't like, that she'd get angry at you? I'm not 10, Go. I know how relationships work." She shrugged again. "Do you?" And in the movie, we don't see the official end to his relationship with Andie. We just see how, throughout this year he's been with Andie, he's telling her that he doesn't love his wife and he wants to end things. But then at the vigil for Amy, he's up there talking about like, "Amy meant so much to me. I love her so much. I want her back." And so Andie just feels kind of disgusted by him when she hears this. And then at the vigil, it is also revealed that Amy had been pregnant. This ends up not being true. Amy wasn't pregnant, but Andie believes, everybody believes that she had been. And so a combination of these things, of course, lead to the end of their relationship. And then eventually she goes to the press and reveals the affair that she was having with him. Whereas in the book, Tanner, Nick's attorney, he tells Nick, like, you need to end things with Andie and end it with her in a way that will keep her, well behaved so that she won't go to the press and reveal this affair before we are ready. But you have to end it with her. You can't keep this going. And we hear how on the plane ride home, he is very easily able to transition from "I love Andie" to "I don't love Andie, and this needs to be over." And so the ease in which he is able to turn that off shows that his love for her was more surface level than he would have earlier admitted. And then when he does go talk to Andie to tell her they have to end things, we read, "Yeah, you know how I feel?" Her eyes burst over, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I feel like a dumb college girl that you started screwing because you were bored with your wife and I made it extremely convenient for you. You could go home to Amy and eat dinner with her and play around in your little bar that you bought with her money, and then you could meet me at your dying dad's house and jack off on my... because poor you, your mean wife would never let you do that." And then she bites his face, and this leaves a mark on his face for a period of time. But yeah, I just love how in the book we see that Andie has this realization that older men that prey on young, naive women aren't as cool or impressive as you think they are. And also the wives they're cheating on aren't as bad as they're making them out to be. They just want someone with a young body and someone who isn't smart enough to see through their bullshit, and also too young to demand the respect they deserve and are too caught up in being the cool girl still. And yes, I will have a whole section later getting into that cool girl monologue. But then another quote I want to share that relates to Nick and Andie. This comes at a point when Nick realizes that Amy is a psychopath, and we read, "I married a psycho bitch. I got a small, nasty bite of gratification. I really did marry a genuine, bona fide psycho bitch. I was not as big an asshole as I thought. An asshole, yes, but not on the grandiose scale. The cheating that had been preemptive, a subconscious reaction to 5 years yoked to a madwoman. Of course I'd find myself attracted to an uncomplicated, good-natured hometown girl. It's like when people with iron deficiencies crave red meat." And honestly, this is such bullcrap because, like, anyone who cheats, I'm sure would love to have some sort of revelation like this about their spouse. That way they could therefore not feel guilty about cheating and they could justify their actions in a sense, right? And so, yeah, it's just like, wow, like, come on, Nick, like, don't try to pawn this off as being Amy's fault. But yeah, the movie cuts a lot of these inner thoughts Nick has. And again, like, we don't even get this breakup scene with he and Andie. We also don't get like the way he's able to just turn off the relationship with her. I mean, in the movie, it does end and he doesn't seem bothered. So I guess the movie shows that the relationship didn't mean as much to him as he may have thought. But yeah, I feel like in the movie, he is still a cheating cad, but I don't think the audience dislikes him for it quite as much as the reader dislikes him for it in the book. And then Andie also, she isn't quite as fleshed out in the movie. However, in both book and movie, she does go to the press and reveal the affair without first telling Nick she is going to do that. And then to talk about Nick's parents. So his mom and dad divorced when he was like 12, and the mom was a fantastic person. And so when she ends up dying from cancer, which again, that's why Nick even came back home, was to be with her while she is going through chemo. But we find out that he hardly sees his mom and he hates going to hospitals. And so Amy ends up spending more time with her than Nick even does, and she goes with her for the chemo treatments. But anyway, so she was a great person. So when she dies, it is a tragedy that leaves everybody heartbroken and sad, and even Amy had been attached to her. Whereas the father, he is still alive at this point, and he is old and senile, but he is still around, and we hear how he was and still is just a hateful, misogynistic old man. And we hear, especially in the book, how Nick has always lived in fear of becoming like his father. My dad was a man of infinite varieties of bitterness, rage, distaste. In my lifelong struggle to avoid becoming him, I developed an inability to demonstrate much negative emotion at all. It was another thing that made me seem like a dick. My stomach could be all oiled eels, and you would get nothing from my face and less from my words. And honestly, this time around, there were a couple things that I could actually relate to as far as Nick is concerned. And that's one of them because I like when I'm feeling strong negative emotions, I don't often show it because due to things in my own childhood, like I learned to keep myself very reserved, but in a way where, yeah, like people don't always see what I'm feeling, and that ends up hurting me in some ways. And yeah, I don't know, just the first time I read this book, I hated Nick. And so the second time around, it was interesting because while I still disliked him, I was also surprised at how many things I could kind of relate to in one sense or another, like either ways that I currently am. But more often than not, they were ways that I realized I have been in the past. And so maybe I could, again, I still disliked him, but maybe I could empathize with him in certain ways that when I read this before, I hadn't quite registered. But anyway, back to Nick and his father. So throughout this book, we hear Nick's inner thoughts and how, kind of like his dad, he is constantly having all of these sexist thoughts about the various women in his life. And his dad also keeps showing up, you know, being this negative reminder to him of like what he doesn't want to be and yet what he is almost becoming. And this detail of the dad popping up, this is just another layer to Amy's torture of Nick, because prior to her leaving, she would go see the father and she would just constantly whisper to him like, you should come to our house. You're always invited. Come over when you have and whenever you want. Like she is wanting him to just constantly be popping up because she knows how much that will frustrate Nick. So pretty diabolical on Amy's part. But yeah, his fear of becoming like his father is kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? And how like what you focus on, even if you're focusing on it in a way where it's like, I don't want to be like this, you're still thinking about it so much that you end up making it happen. And so yeah, Nick, I mean, he's not the same level as his dad, but he starts again just having all of these like hateful negative comments about just women in general. And the movie does have the dad show up at one point, but he is not as prominently around as he is in the book. He's not constantly popping up. And we also do not see how his father's misogyny, how it's seeping into Nick's own brain. And we do see the mom here, like at the start, but again, everything with her, we don't see as much of it in the movie as we did in the book. But as I have alluded to, Amy did go missing, in a sense, but it is because she ran away and staged things to make it look like Nick murdered her. And she does this because she saw Nick with Andie. And in the book, we find out that she coincidentally saw them the very first night they began the relationship because she was going to surprise Nick at the bar when she sees them walk out and kiss. And in the book and movie, we hear that the first time he kissed Amy, she had sugar on her lips. And so he wiped away the sugar so that he could taste her when they kissed. And then the movie adds a detail that when she sees him with Andie, it was snowing and he wipes the snow from Andie's lips before kissing her. And this was a fantastic detail added to the movie, showing that not only is he cheating, but also how he is taking this special moment that had been between he and Amy, and he is just reusing it and he is recycling this move. And so it makes this special moment in their life now feel cheap, you know? And in the book, we get this fantastic line. I've felt the stubble on his cheeks that he knows I don't like, but apparently she does. I've suffered betrayal with all 5 senses for over a year. So I may have gone a bit mad. I do know that framing your husband for murder is beyond the pale of what an average woman might do. And I love that line for so many reasons, but I especially love the end when she's like, I realize I've gone beyond what the average woman would do. But also I love when she says, I've suffered betrayal with all 5 senses. Like, such a great line. And then another detail I absolutely love in both book and movie is that for the treasure hunt, each location she sends him to is a place where he and Amy have some kind of shared memory, but he ends up being confused because he's like, I mean, yeah, we came here, but it wasn't a special experience, so it's weird she chose this, but okay. But then by the end, when he reaches the final spot and the final note, he realizes that she chose places that he had taken Andie to have sex. And so there are places that Amy had been to, and so that's why for so long he's thinking it just relates to Amy. But yeah, in the end, we see like, no, each of these locations are where he went to go cheat. Like that was just such a fantastic reveal, such a great detail, and it was, yeah, I loved it. But also something that is not in the movie is that along with each clue, she also includes a lengthy letter to Nick. And in these letters, she's just being so sappy and romantic and saying how she wants to fix their marriage and she knows they've been struggling, but she loves him, and going on and on about how amazing he is. And so throughout this treasure hunt in the book, he is starting to fall in love with Amy all over again because she is telling him what he wants to hear, kind of like how later on Nick tells Amy what she wants to hear. But yeah, so in both, she stages the house to make it seem like she was either kidnapped or even possibly killed. And then she goes to stay in some remote cabins, and she had been gaining weight the last few months, but hiding it under baggy clothes. And once she leaves, she also dyes and cuts her hair to disguise herself. And in the book, at these cabins, she is the one who gets chatty with another woman there, and the two of them become friendly. Whereas in the movie, this woman is kind of the one who pesters Amy, and Amy eventually caves and starts hanging out with her. But in both, this woman and another guy at the cabins, they rob Amy. She had close to $10,000 in cash, and they hit her and they take her money. And I felt like this part in the book in particular, it highlighted how Amy underestimates the lower class, or just how unfamiliar she is with how things work in the real world, quote unquote. And for example, something I really liked is that the owner of the cabins, she takes a liking to Amy. And so at one point, Amy says to her like, oh, I don't know how I'm going to pay for another week here. I'm running out of money. And she thinks because this woman likes her, she thinks she will let Amy stay there for free, and Amy can therefore stretch out her money. However, when she says this, the woman replies like, well, then you better get a job. And then also the way she underestimates these two who rob her, right? And she wasn't on guard enough, and she didn't realize what these people were capable of, and that maybe, yeah, that they were capable of more than she thought. And so, you know, she's very smart in some ways, and yet she's dumb in other ways, and her rich upbringing definitely sheltered her, and again, just made her not realize what things are like in the real world. But in both, since she has no money, she calls up her old high school beau, Desi. And so they dated in high school, but then she broke up with him, and she told people that then she came into her dorm because they were at a boarding school. She came into her dorm and he was in bed naked, and he had tried to commit suicide because that's how obsessed he was with her. And so this makes people think Desi is crazy, and it makes her parents not like Desi. But this is just one of the many lies she has told throughout her life. And in the book, we hear about quite a few. But also in the book, we hear that she had told Desi that her father had molested her when she was a child. And so Desi and her father both dislike each other for things that neither of them actually did. But Desi, even though they are now like in their late 30s, he is still low-key obsessed with her. Like in the book, it isn't even low-key. He is like straight up obsessed with her. But in the book, when she meets up with him, she just is asking him for money. That's all she wants from him. But he pushes back and suggests that she come and stay with him. And Desi, by the way, he is insanely wealthy. So giving her, you know, a few $1,000s would be nothing to him. But we read, no, I should be on my own for now. Can I just have a little cash from you? What if I say no? Then I'll know your offer to help me isn't genuine, that you're like Nick and you just want control over me however you can get it. Desi was silent, swallowing his drink with a tight jaw. That's a rather monstrous thing to say. It's a rather monstrous way to act. I'm not acting that way, he said. I'm worried about you. Try the lake house. If you feel cramped by me, if you feel uncomfortable, you leave. The worst that can happen is that you get a few days rest and relaxation. And Amy realizes that to argue with him is futile, and she has no other choices, so she agrees to go stay with him. And then once they are there at the lake house, she once again says to him, I guess a little cash would just make me feel more comfortable. Should something happen? Should I need to get out of here quickly? He opens his wallet and pulls out two $20 bills, presses them gently in my hand. "There you are," he says indulgently. "I wonder then if I have made a very big mistake." And then a later line I want to share just shows how Desi tries to manipulate and control her under the guise of being kind. And we read, "I am thinking of a different kind of control. I am thinking about control in the guise of caring. Here is a sweater for the cold, my sweet. Now wear it and match my vision. Nick at least didn't do this. Nick let me do what I wanted." And so in the movie, I think they do a good job with Desi. However, we do not have her asking him for money and the way he refuses to help her in the way she wants. And he is only willing to help her in the way that he wants to help her. And then also in the book, once she gets there, she realizes she is trapped. She has no way out of this place because of the gates surrounding the area and the cameras and whatever. And so in the book, she literally can't leave. He's basically holding her hostage almost. Whereas in the movie, he is definitely trying to control her and he is definitely forcing his presence on her. But I don't know that you felt how trapped she was when she was with him. But eventually she wants to get back to Nick. And so she decides that she has no other option than to kill Desi. But this will actually work well for her because she can claim that he kidnapped her and that is why she was missing. So over a period of weeks, she makes it seem like she has been tied up and raped. And then when she and Desi have sex for the first time, afterwards, she slits his throat. In the movie, she does this right after he finishes. But in the book, she gave him a sleeping pill and did it while he was sleeping, which is a bit nicer. And she then drives Desi's car back to her home and she makes a dramatic return into Nick's arms. But Desi is an important character because he is an example of the nice guy, quote unquote, the guy who will be nice to a woman, but therefore feel entitled, like he is owed something from her because of this. So like all nice guys, he's not actually nice at all. He just wants to control the woman he is into and have her all to himself. And he feels like getting his way is within his rights, considering how nice he's being. So Desi feels like Amy owes him due to him being willing to help her out in this situation. And so again, like all nice guys, he's actually just an entitled ass. But to backtrack a bit, before she kills Desi and before she returns to Nick, so in both, Nick hires a lawyer because clearly the cops think he killed Amy due to the large amount of evidence they have accumulated, all planted by Amy. And the timeline of events is a bit different from book to movie because in the movie, by the time he meets with Tanner, his lawyer, he knows Amy is framing him. But in the book, he met with Tanner before he knows the truth. And then also in both, he goes to see Desi because he has heard about how Desi was this crazy boyfriend Amy had and he lives close. And so in the book, he goes to see him before he knows the truth about Amy and they have a sit down talk. Whereas in the movie, he goes to see Desi after he knows she is framing him and their conversation is very brief. Desi doesn't even let him in the house. But in both book and movie, he goes to see Desi before Desi has Amy with him. But yeah, so in both, Tanner, his lawyer, sets up an interview for Nick. And by the time they do this interview, in both book and movie, he knows Amy has framed him. And so they plan to reveal Nick's affair during this interview. And knowing Amy will be watching, Nick is going to play up what a loser he was for cheating on Amy and to show how remorseful he is and how much he loves her and wants her to come home so that he can be the husband she deserves. However, right before they film the interview, Andie goes to the press and reveals the affair. So they still do the interview and it still does help his image, but Andie coming forward before he had the chance to reveal it and Amy's parents no longer backing him, it still does hurt. And a minor change is that in the book, this was actually the second interview he did because in the book, he is at a bar one night and he drunkenly is interviewed by a woman who records him on her cell phone. And in this interview, he is talking about, because again, he knows Amy has framed him. So in this interview, he is saying oh, Amy's so amazing. She does these treasure hunts. She's so sweet. Again, saying the words he knows Amy wants to hear and also saying the words that he knows will make him look better to the public because the public has turned on him and they think he's guilty. And so this interview is very well received. And so this in part is what leads Tanner to set up the professional interview later on. But yeah, Amy buys into everything Nick is saying. And so this is what makes her want to return home to him, thinking he really is sorry and he will now bend to her will and be the way she wants him to be. But before the interview, Nick is talking to Tanner and Go because they're skeptical because he's if I just say really flattering things to Amy, she'll be watching and this will make her come home. And once people see she's alive, I won't be tried for murder. And they're skeptical, being you really think she's going to fall for this false flattery? And he tells them, Amy was never a person with any sort of bullshit detector. If you said she looked beautiful, she knew that was a fact. If you said she was brilliant, it wasn't flattery, it was her due. So yeah, I think a good chunk of her truly believes that if I can only see the error of my ways, of course I'll be in love with her again, because why in God's name wouldn't I be? So in end of both book and movie, Amy returns and they act like they are, the happy couple who has been reunited. But Nick, over time, he wants to reveal the truth that his wife is a psychopath who framed him for her murder and who murdered Desi in cold blood, right? Because she framed it like she killed him, but it was in self-defense. And so he wants to reveal the truth to the world. However, Amy reveals to him that she used some sperm he had donated months prior, and she is now pregnant with his child. And so Nick feels compelled to stay with her now for the sake of their child. And so even though Tanner and one of the cops, Boney, they know the truth, they believe what Nick has been saying, but they have no hard evidence. And so everyone just eventually gives up on trying to take Amy down for this, and Nick is stuck living with her for the sake of their child. But even though both book and movie end in the same way, a significant change is that in the end of the movie, you view it like, oh man, like poor Nick, this poor guy, he is stuck living with a crazy woman and he hates this and he's miserable and he wants to leave, but he can't. And in the movie, there's a scene where, he's getting upset with her and he calls her the C word, and then she says,
I'm the you married. The only time you liked yourself was when you were trying to be someone this I like. I'm not a quitter. I'm that cunt. I've killed for you. Who else can say that? You think you'd be happy with a nice Midwestern girl? No way, baby. I'm it.
Whereas in the book, this is a bit different because, she does say at one point, like, you wouldn't be happy with someone else. But then Nick thinks to himself, as a man, I had been my most impressive when I loved her, meaning Amy. And I was my next best self when I hated her. I had known Amy only 7 years, but I couldn't go back to life without her. Because she was right. I couldn't return to the average life. I'd known it before she'd said a word. I'd already pictured myself with a regular woman, a sweet, normal girl next door. And I'd already pictured telling this regular woman the story of Amy, the lengths she had gone to punish me and to return to me. I'd already pictured this sweet and mediocre girl saying uninteresting things like, oh no, oh my God. And I already knew part of me would be looking at her thinking, you've never murdered for me. You've never framed me. You wouldn't even know how to begin to do what Amy did. You could never possibly care that much. The indulged mama's boy in me wouldn't be able to find peace with this normal woman. And pretty soon she wouldn't just be normal, she'd be substandard. And then my father's voice, dumb bitch, would rise up and take it from there. Amy was exactly right. So maybe there was no good end for me. Amy was toxic, yet I couldn't imagine a world without her entirely. And so I kind of love how in the book, you're left feeling like, wow, like these two people just deserve each other, right? In the movie, you don't like either of them, but you are still, again, left feeling that in the end, you're just like, oh man, this poor guy stuck with a psycho. Whereas in the book, you see that there's part of him that wants to stay with her and that knows he won't be happy with anyone else. And you just see like, what a toxic relationship they have and how Nick might be, being forced to stay due to the baby, but that he also is getting something out of this relationship. And in the book, when he tells his sister that she is pregnant, so he has no choice but to stay, his sister knows the truth about Amy, right? And so she's heartbroken at hearing about this, and she tells him, you just want an excuse to stay. You two, you're addicted to each other. You are literally going to be a nuclear family. You do know that? You will explode. You will detonate. You really think you can possibly do this for what? The next 18 years? And I love this line so much. It's not in the movie. In the movie, we see her crying, being like, this breaks my heart that you're staying with her. But I love this added line in the book about them being the nuclear family because a nuclear family is stereotypically seen as like a wholesome thing, right? It's like a straight couple with a child, the nuclear family. But I love how here they will be a nuclear family, not only because it's a man, a woman, and a child, but also it will be nuclear because they are like going to explode because they are so toxic and unstable. But there are a few other things I need to talk about before wrapping up this video, one of which is the iconic cool girl monologue. So in book and movie, when we realize Amy is still alive, she tells us how when she first met Nick, she was pretending to be a cool girl as a way to get Nick because she was smitten with him from the start and knew he wanted her to be the cool girl, and so that's what she made herself be. And in the book, we get so much more of this monologue. It's a great scene in the movie, but yeah, there's just so much more to this in the book, and I am not going to share the whole quote because it's very lengthy, but I do want to read a large chunk of it. The cool girl. Men always say that as the defining compliment, don't they? She's a cool girl, hot and understanding. Cool girls never get angry. They only smile in a chagrined, loving manner and let their men do whatever they want. Go ahead, shit on me. I don't mind. I'm the cool girl. Men actually think this girl exists. Maybe they're fooled because so many women are willing to pretend to be this girl. For a long time, cool girl offended me. I used to see men, friends, coworkers, strangers, giddy over these awful pretender women, and I'd want to sit these men down and calmly say, "You are not dating a woman. You are dating a woman who has watched too many movies written by socially awkward men who'd like to believe that this kind of woman exists and might kiss them." And the cool girls are even more pathetic. They're not even pretending to be the woman they want to be. They're pretending to be the woman a man wants them to be. Women across the nation colluded in our degradation. Pretty soon, cool girl became the standard girl. Men believed she existed. She wasn't just a dream girl, one in a million. Every girl was supposed to be this girl, and if you weren't, there was something wrong with you. And she also talks about how early in their relationship, she let Nick brush her off and not prioritize their marriage, and she acted like she was fine with it. And so she's like, that was pure cool girl. And so she says how, actually, I'm just going to read this line exactly. So she says, "Sure, he might be happy. He may say you're the coolest girl ever, but he's saying it because he got his way. He's calling you a cool girl to fool you. That's what men do. They make it sound like you are the cool girl so that you will bow down to their wishes." And so, yeah, she's pretending to be this laid back, chill, cardboard cutout stereotype of a girl. But then through their relationship, she actually does love Nick. And so it gets to the point where she's like, I can't put on this charade anymore. I need to show him the real me. And also to pretend to be a cool girl, it's also demeaning to men, right? To think that's what they want, because like it's an insult to the guy, because what does that say about him if he wants a woman who is just, again, this cardboard cutout of a person and not a real person and not someone who is the man's equal, right? And pretending to be the cool girl, it doesn't help anyone. And so to any women out there who still feel stuck in this cool girl mode, like, not only are you not helping yourself, you're also not helping the men in your life by pretending to be this way, you know? And I feel like I'm a recovering cool girl in some ways, and I cringe to think of some of the things I would do and say when I was in my early 20s. And so, yeah, again, pretending to be someone you're not, for one, as cheesy as it is, that's not helping anyone. But yeah, it's an insult to yourself and the men in your life if you feel the need to be a cool girl. And if men don't like the real you, and if they prefer you to be a cool girl, which is someone who is so fake and surface level, and again, not the man's equal, if that's what a guy wants, then he's just a trash person who doesn't deserve to be in your life anyway. And, you know, Amy is a murdering psycho, obviously, and yet I think a lot of readers can't help but like her, at least to some extent, in part because she does make some great observations, and she does have some moments in this book where the reader is just like, whoa, like, that's so true. And so readers, especially women readers, admire Amy to some extent because she is someone who is the recovering cool girl herself. Although when she pretends to be quote unquote cool girl, she is doing this in a very conscious, deliberate way, where I think a lot of young women end up doing it, not fully realizing what they're doing. But anyway, regardless, she is someone who learns that pretending to be cool girl is not the way to be. And she is also someone who realizes her value, and she stops allowing a man to walk all over her. And of course, she goes about all of this in a very bad way. So it's not like I'm condoning framing your husband for murder, of course. But this is why some women feel empowered, in a sense, when reading certain parts of this book. And by the end of, the book and movie, but again, I feel like this is a theme that's more prominent in the book, is that by the end, because they distrust each other so much, they also know each other better than anyone else. Because we see that when she tells him she's pregnant, he makes her pee on a stick in front of him, and then they go to the doctor and he sees them draw the blood, because he distrusts her so much that everything has to be totally out in the open. And so by everything having to be out in the open, because they don't trust each other, it brings their relationship to a new level of trust, because they have to be open and honest because they don't trust each other. I don't know if I said that in a way that makes sense, but there's just something so interesting about that too. Like, there are no secrets between them, and they can't live with secrets because of the way they don't trust each other and because of the way they know each other so well. And Nick, in the book, he is thinking about this, and we read, "The woman knew me cold, better than anyone in the world. She knew me. All this time I thought we were strangers, and it turned out we knew each other intuitively, in our bones, in our blood. It was kind of romantic, catastrophically romantic." And in the book too, we see how they are really good at also just pretending things are normal, and they're able to slip into the old roles, and they have these sweet, playful, romantic moments with each other. And Nick, sometimes he'll get so caught up and he'll almost forget the psycho that she is. And so he has to remind himself, like, whoa, don't let your guard down. She's crazy. But again, it shows how even though he's being forced to stay in this relationship, again, how he kind of enjoys it and he's getting something out of it. And he's even able to drop his guard enough at times that they're able to slip into like a romantic, cute little relationship. And again, the movie didn't show this at all. And so I wish the movie highlighted more just like how weird and twisted their relationship was at the end of the book. And to circle back to the self-fulfilling prophecy I talked about earlier, so Nick has been worried his whole life that he would become a miserable, woman-hating man like his dad. And so, as marriage soon begins to be more than he can handle, he takes his frustrations out on Amy in some ways, and he starts disrespecting her and starts making her feel like she has no choice but to nag him. And then he cheats on her, which is the biggest disrespect of all. And he does this for a whole year, right? And he says in the book that he takes part of the blame for turning Amy into what she became because of his treatment of her. And so again, he almost is bringing this all about in the end. And he ends up being a man who truly does hate his wife while also feeling stuck with her, but while also accepting this fate and realizing that being with a woman he hates is the only way he will ever be quote unquote happy. So yeah, he turned himself into someone who is married to a woman he hates, And so yeah, I just think this self-fulfilling prophecy aspect is something that's really interesting to think about in regards to the book specifically. But I also need to mention Amy's parents real quick. So in both, they became rich from writing kids' books called Amazing Amy. And so it's about this cartoon girl who is based on Amy, but is like the better version of Amy. And we hear how when Amy was 10, she quit the cello. And then in the next Amazing Amy book, she sticks with the cello and becomes amazing at it. Or when she is cut from the tennis team, the following Amy book has Amy being the tennis champion. And so a lot of Amy's flaws are highlighted in these Amazing Amy books. And we see, Amy is a psychopath, and so she's a bit of a perfectionist in that sense. But also being raised with parents who write books like this, what that must have done to her mentally, that definitely contributed to how screwed up she was. And in the end of the book, her parents, once she is returned, they've been saying oh, we love our daughter, we need her, we want her back. But then once she returns, they quickly fly back home because throughout Amy's disappearance, all of the media coverage, the Amazing Amy books, the sales have skyrocketed. And so they're doing great financially. And they want to hurry back home because they want to work on their next Amazing Amy book, which will, of course, have something to do with her disappearance, right? And her kidnapping. And so you just see how messed up they are. And we read in the book that when she has gone missing, she sees in the news how distraught her parents are, but she gets a satisfaction out of putting her parents through this because of how much bitterness she has towards them and how they have just been profiting off of her in a sense for her entire life. But time to get to book versus movie now. So when it comes to which one wins, just going to cut to the chase and I'm going to say the book wins, which honestly, the first time I read the book and watched the movie, I also said the book wins. But this time around, I was wondering if my opinion would change because as I read the book, I did feel differently about the characters. I didn't hate Nick as much as I did the first time around, and I didn't like Amy as much as I did the first time around. So they were almost a bit more equal. And so given some of my changed views on them, I was curious if I would end up liking the movie more and maybe the movie would win. However, the movie, it just didn't delve quite as deep into these two people and how messed up they both were. So that's still my biggest complaint. And I said this in my previous episode, how in the movie, you feel sorry for Nick in the end. And in the book, like, sure, you kind of feel sorry for him, but at the same time, like, they deserve each other. They're both twisted and so messed up. And again, Nick has realized, like, he wouldn't be happy with someone else because he likes the drama that Amy brings into his life, to put it lightly. This movie is still amazing, though, and it is one of those movies where I cannot imagine anyone else in any of the roles because it is just so perfectly cast all the way around. And Rosamund Pike was nominated for her role here as Amy, which of course was very well deserved. And there's also just so many great details in the movie. For example, when he shows up at the bar, he and Go just play board games at the bar, and he brings the game Mastermind, and then the other board games they have are Let's Make a Deal, The Game of Life, like, so kind of foreshadowing what is going to be happening throughout the rest of the movie, right? And so yeah, I would highly recommend this film. Also, it's David Fincher, who is known as just being, you know, a very talented artist. But yeah, so I would highly recommend the movie, but still at the end of the day, I think the book just gives you so much more to think about. And again, it's so well written. There's so many great lines. I highlighted so much. And yeah, it just goes deeper into some of the themes that the movie only touches on. Anyway, yeah, that wraps it up for Gone Girl. Let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know if you agree, if you disagree. Also, which did you experience first, the book or the movie? And if you watched the movie first, what were your thoughts on the book? Because that, whichever you do first can definitely influence your opinion of both of them. So anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.